Hello, my name is David Turner and this is episode 13 of the Lunar Poetry Podcast. This episode has been a few months in the planning now, so I'm very happy today to welcome Travis Alabanza. Hello, Travis.
Hi there.
And S.A. Smythe. Hello, S.A.
Hello.
And as usual, we're going to begin with my guests introducing themselves, so we'll begin with Travis.
My name is Travis Alabanza. I'm a young black queer performance artist and writer.
Hello, S.A. Smythe, slightly less young, academic and poet.
Thank you very much. And I've decided that we're going to begin with a poem from Travis today. So,
Brilliant.
there you go, Travis.
This is called Sing It to My Body. What about my body? What about my protection? What about my body? What about my protection? What about my body makes it not worth your protection? Makes me undeserving of a text to check I arrived home okay. No offer to walk this body through cis-ridden streets because my lipstick on this leg hair affords me no protection. And what about my existence? Makes me not worthy of your care. Makes my skirt and heels a choice to deviate and never wonder. And only our sisters can be afraid of those darker alleys because no one cares if my mascara is ridden with fearful tears. What about my body? What about my protection? What about my body? What about my protection? And I'm tired of bodies like these having to scream for your protection. Write statuses and articles just to convince you of our danger. Break nails through clenching fists in fright. Blackened eyeshadow to preempt our bruises. Because what about my body has given warrant to this danger? What about my body has given warrant to this danger? What about my body? What about my protection? What about my body? What about my protection? What is it about my body that makes it so disposable? Makes it welcome to your laughter, but never your safekeeping. No, it is never granted your anger in persevering because this body's breathing is birthed in synonym for violence. And what about my shade of tights? Makes my legs born to be running, makes me only correctly in function when I am in fear. You can care for me on stage, but never on the streets, because what is this body if it is not your performance? What is this body if it is not your performance? What about my body? What about my protection? What about my body? What about my protection? And I'm exhausted of having to make words just to have your ears, write songs for you to sing just to hear what protection feels like, breaking my silence only to ignite temporary rage, because what about my body has to beg for this protection? What about my body has to create phrases for you to sing with me? What about my body? What about their protection? What about their body? What about their protection?
Thank you, Travis. Very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just a couple of things to say before we start, and just so the listeners know what's going on today. The main focus of the discussion was centred around writers and performers that identify as QTIPOC and their place and the space afforded to them by the established poetry and spoken word scene here in Britain. And I've been, in the months planning this, screwing up and throwing away all the disclaimers I kept thinking of putting in, but I'm going to start with one thing, and that is that everything we talk about today will be from a personal perspective. And I've not invited S.A. or Travis here to speak on behalf of a community or a generation, but rather to shed some light on some very important issues based on their own experiences. And I'm sure my guests, as well as I am, welcome any feedback from listeners after this discussion. And that's it, I'm not going to make any more of those. Just going to talk, which would be good. First question, how much of your work is informed by identifying as QTIPOC?
All of it, because I am.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you'll see, Travis, that was really beautiful.
Thank you.
As always. I think, and obviously I've been thinking a lot about it because, I knew I'd be here today, but in general, in the last year, thinking about sort of my creative process and my relationship to my writing, I think a lot about how explicit I am or am not being with my writing and upfront about, like, this is coming from a place of being XYZ identitarian category. And in some ways, I'm like 2 minutes in already critiquing myself and my writing, but stick around, it gets better. But I think one critique I even have of my own process or a struggle that I have with my writing is that it's a little bit closed sometimes. Like, there are definitely things that I'm talking about, and like, here's this explicit thing that I want to address or approach, but throughout my process, it sort of gets a bit masked, but then the masking itself becomes kind of what I'm trying to say, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I think it's obviously central to anything I say.
Yeah, I think I get that question a lot. My work's obviously, like, at the moment really quite explicit. All the stuff I guess I show is very explicit. And I think I have the same answer as essay, in the sense that, like, everything I do is going to be influenced by who I am, because from the simple fact of walking to your house this morning, you know, I was looked at twice, screamed at by a kid. So, like, you know, it's hard to then write about, like, some rivers and some oceans without then thinking about, like, how this influences me walking down these streets. At the moment, I'm part of, like, a young writers program, and part of the critique that I had when I submitted my anthology for that was that, like, my work was too much about the same thing. And I was thinking about that a lot, because I am trying to, like, start showing more of my other work that maybe is less explicit. But then I was also thinking about the fact that, like, for me, my journey to finding writing and finding poetry was to voice exactly this. Like, was the fact that, you know, I was angry and I am still angry, and all these things I didn't know how to articulate, that, like, metaphors aren't really going to work for me. Like, screaming about it is. Like, if you're having an explicit incident, such as being, you know, called a tranny on the street, no metaphor is really going to hide or heal that for me than other just explicitly saying it. And I think it's this thing that, like, we actually do to QTIPOC writers. Like, we do it to ourselves, but mainly white audiences and white editors and white critics do to us. Like, when a white man writes explicitly about love all the time, and, like, this possessive hetero idea of love that they have over this woman that they, like, broke up with 20 years ago, and they're still writing about it, no one says, why are you still writing about it?
Straight up, all the writers I learned about is
Right. But yeah, so I guess that's where I'll go with that.
Yeah, I mean, I know you both pretty well, and I was pretty sure I knew the answer to that question anyway. But just for the clarity for the listeners, but it was also born of the fact of this quote that I read last summer by Drew Kruger, which is, "I'm tired of people assuming that I have some special relationship with my identity or my body just because I'm not straight." And I wanted to go on to ask, do you think other QTIPOC writers might feel obliged to continue to return to the theme of their identity because there are so many strong and talented voices that are doing that already? And this is more just a general question to any writer, you know, if you identify as any...
I guess it's an interesting quote. I guess it's hard for me to comment on, like, someone else's process of writing, definitely. I think we all have really different relationships to our sexuality, our gender, our race. And I think even having not a relationship with our sexuality, gender and race is a relationship in itself, especially if we're in, like, a world that tells us anything that's not straight, like, isn't the norm. Then to have a relationship that you don't see it as something that's vocal to you is a relationship, because you've, like, maybe got to that. I think, like, the idea of feeling pressure to write about something, I think that's, like, somewhat true in the sense that, like, sometimes... I don't know, like, for me, actually, I feel the pressure sometimes to not speak about certain things. I guess I can't really speak for other people's process, but, like, I think that, like, we all have pressures of what we feel we need to write and what we feel we need to look like on stage. And I think that, like, or on paper. So I don't know, like, I think that's tough. I don't know, what do you think is that?
Yeah, no, I agree, which I suspect will be a common refrain.
I'll try and disagree with
do,
you.
yeah, we'll get contentious.
I'll only invite you to argue.
Well, I genuinely think, I mean, I agree, and I also I heard the quote and I was like, I almost wonder if it's true, false, but, you know, it's more or less true, but sort of missing the bigger picture. Like, yes, it may be true that that is a feeling that occurs, but I think that feeling could also be, you know, external. Like, people see you as other and expect you to speak on that otherness. But then also, I think, and this is more speaking for myself because I too can't speak for anyone's process, but I think my obsessions in my own writing come from that place of otherness and marginalization, but also because I want answers for myself. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't actually have anything to do with other people. I mean, to an extent, because it's like, I keep coming back to these issues of gender identity, sexuality, performance, masculinity, etc., because I don't have any answers, precisely because they're othered, that I want to figure them out, and I need to keep going back to writing. So sometimes that exhaustion, I feel it, and I want to project and say it's because people are making me write about these things. I can't get any play if I don't write about anything but these things, but also I need the answers. And when they become banal, when they become sort of commonplace and I've sort of answered them, if that ever happens, then I think I'll be too bored to continue, and so will other people, because society will be in a different place, not me. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Travis and I first discussed having this conversation last summer, wasn't it? Early last summer, and I mentioned the word activism, and we both cringed because I knew it wasn't quite the right word. But for activism, what I mean at this point is educational protest or community work. And I'd like to talk about the elements of activism, both your writing. How aggressive do you still feel you need to be in your work in order to educate audiences or to get messages across?
I don't know how aggressive I feel I have to be. I want to say that I am very aggressive and I embrace it. And again, not necessarily in the harshness or the expertness of how I write, but really, we've talked about this before, and I think about it often, being misread and how you sort of can't write or speak your way out of that to a certain extent. So if I'm on stage or if I'm sharing my work textually in other mediums, I'm going to do my best to insist that you don't read it anyway besides the way that I want. And that can be read as aggression.
Actually, just before you answer, Travis, that raises a good point. I think there's a tool used by white cis men to accuse people of aggression as if it's a bad thing. Sorry, I'm probably just putting words out of your mouth. But I just I'll shut up. You said
way to defeat my punchline, David.
What I mean more by aggression is forthrightness, and
yeah, I don't know. Part of my answer still stands. But I also to take on this nuance, I think. I think, and again, this goes back to what I initially said. I think there's some parts of me in the way that I write that is a little bit masked, and sometimes I wonder, between me and my journal, if that's just because I'm actually not fully ready to, embrace the radical, fullness that is myself. Not even about my writing or how other people are reading it, but really, to reveal to myself and then have others be a part of that witnessing. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, aggression meaning forthrightness, I think a lot of people know what I'm talking about because it's for them and not for the people who don't know what it's about or sort of can't pass the lines, even if it's metaphorical. It's not for them anyway, so it may seem less aggressive or less direct or less speaking to a truth, but it wasn't theirs anyway, so it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, and I think that I like that you use the word aggression because I think we should be real in the words. The people that are looking at us are not using they were very forthright. They're saying, that was that aggressive trans kid on stage shouting at me, right? So I like that you used aggressive. And I think also we should note the difference that a lot of, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I say a lot of your work is on text and to be read, right? Which carries a different kind of aggression, right? It gets them with both are resistance, right? And a lot of the time my work is on stage and mixed with different performance elements. And I think even if my work was talking about some calm sea and ocean, I keep on going to all these white ideas of poetry.
Because I
don't know, GCSE anthology is let's talk about trains and seas. Say if I even went on stage and started doing this art school I can't swear on here, can I? Art school piece about the sea, right? That, even if it was the calmest piece ever with tranquil music, just my body on that stage would be seen as aggressive. The fact that I'm going in the past month I've been performing in all these white spaces with white support acts for me then to headline them. That's an aggressive act because this white queer scene, this white art scene is not made for me. So I'm aggressively putting myself on there. I think for me, I have to be aggressive in outwardly. I don't have to be, I want to be, but it's my protection, right? So there's certain gigs I do when it's just QTIPOC or when it's a safer space that everyone comes back from and is oh, you gave a different energy there. And it's because I think as a performer I have different elements you know, my background's in performance and I'm using poetry as like part of my performance, right? And I think that, like, for example, I'm really excited tonight. I'm performing at like a library gig with like that Rudy Lowe's organising. It's going to be majority QTIPOC, and I can't wait to read some work that I will never probably read anywhere else at any other gigs that I'm doing this month. And that will still be aggressive because aggressive is part of me, but like, where's that aggression to? I think, I don't know, actually, no, it wouldn't be aggressive. I think it would be like totally like healing and calm. But that aggression that everyone projects to me on stage, I think I actually had like someone like come up to me after the show and was like, you were so fierce, like, but not like other people's fierce, like angry fierce, like I was scared of you on stage. And it's this white queer person. I was like, good, like I'm glad, because like I want them to be, because like the only people I want in the audience really when I'm on there to feel any kind of love from me, like to feel any kind of like I want to snap my fingers at you, is like the QTIPOC in the room, right? And if anyone else gets anything from it, then that's like a bonus for them. But really, like, yeah. So I don't know, like, I love my aggression. It's kind of what, like, I don't think I'd survive without like this like fire and anger in me, right? Like, it's the protection. And maybe like I'll grow into finding a more like, maybe when I'm a bit older, there will be a more useful way for me to like project myself. But at the moment, like, fuck it.
And
Nice.
so last summer when we discussed this, you, Travis, you also raised an important point about the difference between activism, aggressive or otherwise, directed towards people that may be oppressing, and activism which aims to support a community. And do you feel like at the moment that we're talking about poetry rather than sort of performance stuff, but do you think this balance is right at the moment, or would you like to see more people writing in a way, in a more supportive way?
So I think I meant what I was talking about how like there's sometimes times for like community building and community work, and like what does it look like if your work is constantly like focusing on white. I think I was trying to like decenter whiteness in like my work, right? Like if I don't take stock and think like, when is my work community building, and like what is my work doing for the queer black poor kid reading this, if it's like bouncing straight off them, but it makes the white man really angry at me, then like, is my work really like building anything community-wise? So I think I thought about that a lot. So that's why like I started writing Stories of a Queer by Muddy Kid, which is a much more like text-based storybook. And I made it in the idea that like, this is for no one's sake other than like to create and heal, right? There was like, so I tried to like take that anger that will always be there and put it into like more inward like community feels. I think at the time when we were talking, I was feeling a lot of like disconnection with what like community means, and was seeing a lot of like culture that was creating a lot of like anger, and it was really hard because we are told not to like police anger, but at the same time I was like, when does this anger create like love in the community for me? So yeah, I think sometimes there's a way of like getting that anger into like love, but like it's who you're directing that love to, right? Like I can always be angry at every white guy, like no one can tell me not to, like
So easy.
that's what I want to do, right? But like I want to also find that anger and like channel it into like love for like other kids like me.
Am I allowed to? I'm going to ask questions. So
Yes,
do you
of course.
think that, because you said this was last year and I wasn't a part of that conversation, do you think now it's gotten better in terms of, so how you've orientated yourself has made it better in terms of your community practice or your community building?
Yeah.
Like, have you seen a community being formed in a more concrete way because you've changed?
I think like if I redefine community to fit the brief, I've seen people around me and my friends, like, because like community's friends, right? So like I think before I was looking at this broader sense of community that I was like kind of building on this ideal that we could create, and I think we can. I think it just takes a little bit more work. But around me, what I've seen is a lot less, like when I'm in my downtime now with other queer black friends that like chill with me at uni or chill with me at home, I've started realising that what are we spending our time doing? Are we spending like 100% of our time being super, super angry talking about how white people have fucked us up? Or are we spending some of that time, right? Like, yeah, it's needed. Like, how was your day? This happened. Some person said this to me, great. And then we're spending 75% like watching some great movies, chilling back, making some good food, talking about our mums. So like, I've seen it redirected in my personal life. Whether or not I've seen that translate into like a wider social community,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Actually, I'd just like to go back to something you said earlier, I said, about your work being for other people of colour, in that what you would write, not exclusively, but you write as yourself and I would talk to other people who identify in the same way. What I was wondering was that, is there a situation now where it's easier as a young person of colour to get up and do an angry poem because that's what white audiences understand? they understand that form of aggression. If you get up and do something that's sort of community-based and love-based, that only other people of colour can understand, there's a chance white audience go, well, because they think, because there's an assumption everything should be directed towards them, and every poem, every form of poetry should be understandable to them, that there'll be a disconnect, and then it would seem as though that form of poetry is failing when it's not. It's just not speaking to those people in that room. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I have no idea how to answer it.
No,
precisely because I don't. I mean, I really outed myself at the beginning of this as an academic as well, and I think that's an interesting. Not that you're not, but Travis. But there's an interesting difference in that I have in the amount of media I have. I mean, Travis said that they use. So I'm going to phrase it wrong. Poetry is a part of performance.
Yeah.
So performance is where you come from, and I'm the opposite.
Yes.
If there is an opposite in a kind of binary way, and I think precisely because I have like an array of different text-based ways to communicate, and also that, to be fair, give me legitimacy, but I don't really think about it. I mean, I'll tell you, in my academic sphere, a lot of what I write is just not intelligible anyway, because it's not anglophone, it's not heterosexual, it's not cis, it's not it's not a lot of things, even in the areas in which I'm writing, and it works the same in my poetry. So when I, which I've been trying to do in the last year, also take text-based things and like try to perform them or figure out how to make them performance-based things and not text-based things, and see what changes and what stays the same. The last thing in all of that internal sort of creative process that I'm thinking about is really like, is this legible to white people? I can't tell you. And I also so I just don't know. I don't think my anger manifests itself in as explicit. I don't even know how to use explicit is not even the word, because I can't I can't even tell you how many times I mean I don't even know how to say this. Obviously needs to be recorded, but like it's really, I hope it's really clear from whoever interacts with me, the depths of my pro-blackness, let's put it that way. See, even in my phrasing it this way, it has nothing to do with white folk. It just literally has nothing to do with white people. So when I'm writing or performing and standing up, I can't even. Yeah. I barely make eye contact with the audience in general, let alone do I think was this gotten by a certain kind of people? Because I know affectively, almost in a different kind of body language, or there's another language at play that the people that I want to get it. Even if I'm not, even if we have like different like class or nationality, other kinds of things, I think there's a generosity that is almost, I was going to say in spite of ourselves, but almost because of the resistance that we've had to live. I don't know if that was a long answer, but
no, that was real. And that's like, you can also tell when you're like listening to someone, like, you just know, like, if someone's like there, who they're there for sometimes. I think like I haven't reached that stage, like I can be super honest, like I haven't reached that stage where like I'm performing in front of an audience and sometimes I don't catch myself thinking, what is that Tom and John gonna think in there, right? Like I'm not, like I thought I was, like I really thought I was like, yo, this is just for me and this is just for like other queer black people. And then like just came back to London after the holidays and my first gig was in like this Soho gay bar, and like it was, I didn't see one person of colour, but also I didn't really see one woman there, like person that I was like viewing or like reading as a woman there. And it reminded me that like, oh, you still care, you're still scared by them, you still wonder what they think, because I'd never been so nervous. And like, you know, that really like was a good time to check myself. Like, you think because you're performing like this hello explicit ode to like queer blackness that you still don't have this internalized shit that sometimes means I've got to work through, that like I'm still nervous about what they think. So like that's definitely been something I've been working on, and it's something I definitely like strive to like achieve, right? Just to like know that actually like this white idea of credibility, this white idea of like what we deem as like respectable poetry, what we deem as like a good performance, like it doesn't mean anything to me. Like publication, any of that, like it doesn't mean anything to me. And it's about saying that out in the air to then like learn how to like make that like 100% like it doesn't mean ish, right?
That's it.
So the quote that I mentioned earlier from Drew Creel was taken from the anthology Troubling the Line, and it talks academically about what the editors describe as trans and genderqueer poetics. And I just wanted to ask you both what that phrase means to you, if anything at all. Because it doesn't. The phrase itself is confusing.
I should have done some research.
Just initial thoughts, because we don't have to get hung up on this actual point, because we can go on and talk about other things, but just that phrase itself.
Trans and genderqueer poetics. Yeah. It doesn't really mean anything to me. Probably because I've not researched where it came from or who it is, but also because I'm like quite bad with like labeling like type of things like that. I don't know. Maybe my poetics are quite gender fucking queer. Yeah.
Gosh, yeah. I also was publishing editor for a trans journal, asterisk on now, and so I remember last year, and as a part of it being, you know, part of the discussion of what gets put in and what and why, really talking through the pieces. And I think maybe there is something to the term, but I also want to reflect or raise up again that I'm an academic, and so labels, gosh, I love them, and as much as I want to, you know, eschew them and have like, is it construction, deconstruction, post-deconstruction, like there's always sort of genealogy of terms, or genealogies of terms. I'm already doing it now, and maybe it doesn't have actual purchase in the world of my lived experience. So basically the same thing as what Travis is saying, perhaps. I don't know, like, if identity politics weren't a trap, I'm going to say that every time I can, if and there were not some sort of debt that I would eventually have to pay, whether I know it or not, affective, like some kind of debt, then I would like willingly go with a term like that. But I think that there is, and I'm not sure what it is yet, and so I'm suspicious. But then I also think, by nature of being a QTIPOC person, and one who writes poetry, ipso facto, I'm a person who ascribes to queer, genderqueer, trans poetics. Yeah,
I think
it was a long. I'm going to shorten my answers,
because it definitely coloured the way I read the book. Like this phrase kept floating in every time I read a poem. It was trans and genderqueer poetics. That was what I was trying to find. Like, it really, I mean, it's the point of the anthology, but I think when you state things like that at the beginning of a collection, it does influence the way you then view each piece and each writer, I think.
So then that's, I guess, like that author's purpose, right, in doing that and like giving this name to it before you read these poems. So I guess it just depends in like whether or not, like I prefer to switch it, right? Like I'm a transgender non-conforming person writing poetry rather than like, I don't know, like I just like I again, I'm not really good at those terms. I'm not really academic.
But it's about power as well. Oh, thank God. But I mean, I think it's definitely about power, and what's coming to mind as well is a lot of people in like the disability rights or CRIP movements, as they like use those terms, and it's like a disabled person or person with a disability, like how you shift the power of the label and the terminology, and who has agency in that term. And I think, yes, it's true that that's the purpose of the editor, author writing this anthology, but I think, framing this anthology, but I think it just makes it super transparent that the act of framing an anthology or editing a volume is to situate yourself at the top of a hierarchy or at the center of an axis of power that doesn't really speak to me in this moment. So yes, I have to say, like, here's a showcase of these kinds of things, but what it does is sort of chips away a bit or draws power away from the individual works. If you're doing precisely what they wanted you to do, it's not an accident, you're right, that you're like, okay, I've read this thing, let me figure it out on its own terms. Then also, I guess this is trans poetics. I think violence is sometimes an overused word, but I think that's like the the violence of anthologization and like making something speak for something other than itself.
I mean, it seemed like they were trying to do the right thing in that they were unashamedly putting together an anthology of of work by trans and genderqueer
Mm-hmm.
writers, but it
But
sort of
impacts over
over
intentions as
academicises the collection perhaps. And just as an aside, I don't know if you saw it yesterday, there was a piece on the Guardian website about whether it should the phrase person of colour should be something they use now. And the main thing that came out of it really was that perhaps they shouldn't have a middle-aged white guy discussing what those sorry, but that's
a sound conclusion to me.
But yes, we can talk about labels, but it's just a really odd piece of about 800 words, which sort of didn't go anywhere. Definitely didn't need to happen.
Sounds like the Guardian.
Yeah. I think the reason I wanted to talk about the phrase also, about whether it's a kind of poetics and what that means, is because then reading the anthology, it sort of made me think, well, I'll try and analyse this poetry in some way and try and find returning themes and identify returning imagery and stuff. But then, is that just not what's synonymous with the problem with established publishing routes is that what you don't want or don't need in that situation is cis men going through that kind of writing, trying to work out what's being said, or how this work should be read.
Well, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, Travis, because my initial, the consternation you read on my face was more like, well, why wouldn't you want to read it? I think, and this is part of what I mean when identity, I understand its purchase and its value and its youthfulness and also ability to oppress. But I also, it's a little bit concerning sometimes when some folks I know who live under the guise of allies, they wear it as an identity, which don't.
Well,
because it's not, I think may come to a similar tendency, why I of XYZ identitarian categories shouldn't be viewing XYZ or ABC body of work and sort of putting my trying to figure it out. I'm isn't that literally the problem? Isn't the problem that there's a system of there's systemic oppressions and the structures converge to oppress certain kinds of bodies and certain kinds of people, and the people who either unwittingly live under those things, less maliciously live under those structures, go about the world and saying, well, that's different and I don't understand it and I can keep going about my life and keep thriving and never have to really understand it. I think in a certain sense I'm all for the FUBU, the for us, by us, because that's what we've been saying. But on the other hand, or an extension of that same hand, I definitely think a cis white dude who picks up a trans anthology and tries to read it and is I don't I have no idea what are they saying, this doesn't speak at all to my experience, and A, that's okay, and B, there's something beautiful here, C, there's something powerful here that deserves to thrive and live. And even if you don't even act on that person, doesn't even act or move forward on that and just lets people live, in this case QTIPOC or trans people, that's literally leaps and bounds from what the systems of oppression have been doing for the last millennia,
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think when I put any work out there, although my intention of who is it for is very much in my head and there, I have to be so aware that that's not going to be the only person reading it. So which means that when I put my work out there, I have to think about that and I have to remember that. And that means that I think when a cis, we'll use this cis white dude as this epitome of but obviously there's other nuances of people that aren't going to get my work, but this cis white dude's reading my work, they understandably don't get it. Can they then not analyse my work and stuff like that? Yeah, I think they can. I think the danger is in if they then project their outward opinion to the world about my work without recognising that they are coming at it from a whole different book on a different bookshelf, right? So it's what happens when those white voices that are more respected in white poetry scenes then comment on this trans anthology publicly. That's when I have an issue, because their voice and their power and their opinion will be so much more valid than the opinion of all the trans kids that absolutely found love and amazing power in that work. Do I think that means they can't read it and analyse what they're thinking and why they're thinking it? Not at all. I think it's really helpful, right? A lot of my cis friends, when I started like coming out to them a bit more like internally, like and like less publicly, when I like did it for them like a couple of years ago, or did it for me but with them, we started by like reading a lot of like, we all create art, and we started about showing a lot of art and stuff like that, and my art really helped them break down some of these binary views they had of gender, right? If they didn't sit with that work and like look at it and like think about it and analyze it as cis people, they wouldn't have been able to understand as well their really good friend. So like, I think going back to Essay's point, if this person reading this trans anthology means that like the next day they're not going to shout at me on the street, then like, freaking read my work.
And not only that, I was saying that, I was speaking from the point of the consumer, and you're also speaking from like the publisher, the person with more like power for that work to circulate. And to bridge that, I don't want them to just read it, I want them to buy it. Like, I want them to put their cis white male dollars on the line, because they have more capital to circulate than the average trans QTIPOC person. So that's what I mean. Like, when people are like, well, this is not for me and it's not for the space, or like, I think actually, sure, it's not for you, you can still support it, and please do support it so that we can thrive. Like, your opinions don't really matter to me or anything, but your money really does.
Yeah,
I think that's the point I was trying to make, is that of course these anthologies should be open to be read and analysed by anyone, because that's what poetry is for and about, but there's too much of a natural leap for a lot of people to then question how it's speaking to them directly without saying, am I the intended other side of this conversation, you know? And even if you're not the intended other side of the conversation, absolutely it doesn't exclude you then from reading
and buying,
you know, and
enjoying.
Because it is I completely agree with Travis that it is an amazing resource to use to help people, give people an insight into what people are thinking. And that's what's beautiful about poetry in general, is that.
Yeah, I was going to add, just also like, it's fun, right? Like, I want to bring the fun. I want to bring the word fun into this. Like,
no.
Like, so like, I've had so much of like some of my most like, reading poetry can also be super fun and funny, right? And like, QTIPOC can also be really hella funny, right? And like, I've had some of my, like, a big transformative experience with me for like 2 or 3 years. It's going to be coming up to 3 years ago, when I spent some time in Oakland around QTIPOC. It was the first time I was ever around like just QTIPOC for like a really long time, and there was a really amazing group of like fat black women that like used the word fat to describe themselves, and like they were queer, they were fat, they were black, and they made poetry together, right? Like, none of this is something that I can at all relate to as someone that's not a woman and isn't fat, and like they were also all dark skinned, right? And that poetry was so fun and amazing, and I enjoyed like watching them. Whilst it wasn't for me, like, I enjoyed it, but I also learned so much. And I think that's what's really important. Like, just because something's not for you doesn't mean you can't also like really enjoy it. And I think like we are used to that, right? Like, we have to, like, as QTIPOC, we have to watch TV shows, movies, stuff like that, and sacrifice it not being for us, and sometimes still enjoy it. Like, now I don't enjoy it as much, but like when we're younger growing up, like, we have to enjoy all these shows that aren't for us. We don't have to, but we do, right? Otherwise there's nothing to watch on TV. Like, but as soon as like a cis white dude has to like watch something that's not for them, I'm like, nope, this isn't for me, can't do it, not going to the cinema, not doing any of it, not reading these books, right? And it's like, no, we're hella funny, and we're cute. So like,
we're cute.
Like, black don't crack. So
Cecily Tyson, look, anyway, I can just don't crack. No, I think that's very true, and I think Toni Morrison once said something like that as well, especially around the time that she won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And I think something that we had to, and here's some reverse racism for the white people out there who think that that's a thing. I think that it also speaks to the capacity for black, trans, QTIPOC folk to have like a greater imagination and a greater sense of empathy. And I also think that's one that's necessary, based on resistance and resilience and all these things, but it's necessary to like thrive or just exist in this current like, state of oppressions in which we're sort of confounded in. Like, we have to see and imagine that this is not all there is. We have to see I don't know, Columbo, just to put myself in there, and like growing up whenever, we have to watch the things that you watch and say, yeah, I can see affectively or related to emotions, this person or this experience is one that I can sort of get behind. I can see this story, because what I'm living in, I mean, it has to be some sort of, you know, story. It can't be the reality that we're sort of destined to. Otherwise, I think all resistance is really futile and lost.
I think next I want to go on to discuss sort of publishing and promotion of poetry, but maybe we can take a poem from essay before that.
Oh, what? Okay. This poem is called You Cannot Ordain the End of Times of Disillusion with a Wave of Your Hand. Cynicism is a strong castle guarded heavily by powerful armies. You need more than a nice turn of phrase. An insurrection, a hurricane, a noise so insane that it shakes up the consciousness, and even then, I doubt that this is enough. Allow me to see you now when I have left me, and I am leaving you safe and sound like pure prose, like sliding stone, like artifice. You turn your back and wave, and rare, I gather up your smiles like we will soon be gathering carrots that the other harvesters have forgotten under pebbles. Moving west, I held my arms violently outstretched in the anticipation of a second life promised to those who survived the fall of comet to Earth. When they look back on our story, it will be a tale of two travellers, you and I, who have never parted spiritual company, neither in a mirror or on the road. It lays before us like a rhyme that carries the rush of our words. Be me so I can be you. Rise up so I can carry you. Come nearer that I can know you. Whatever is sealed becomes near. Whatever is distant opens up. And if you do not misspell care, she will overflow and flow through your nostrils. I too might become one of your personal belongings if you do not misspell it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to ruin the mood now, asking questions again. We're all relaxed. I just wondered what both of you, what your views are on the barriers towards when it comes to getting published for QTIPOC writers.
Okay. I'll give that some time. I think for me, one of the main barriers is language and class and who we see and visibility, and I could talk about them all for ages, but instead I want to focus on the fact that being from a council estate, being from a really working class background in a single parent family, and then having your first introduction to poetry being your GCSE anthology means that your first idea of poetry is that it's not for you, right? So to me, and then figuring out that you like rhyming and you're that's my first introduction to poetry. Everyone says what's my first introduction to poetry? It was walking down to the green by my shops and hearing the people 4 years older than me spit bars at each other and call each other waste man. That was the best poetry.
Yeah.
Because I then took that into the school and we would have rap battles in the middle of the playground. We would spit bars at each other, and that was my poetry, right? But that was the poetry that was banned from that classroom, right? If teachers caught you doing that, you would get told off. So already, before I even decide that, I want to, write, before I even formulate my idea that, this would ever be something I could do, I'm told that, my earliest examples of, rhythm and rhyme and, making words up and having fun, right, which is what poetry is wrong and not allowed in the classroom, especially not the English classroom. I'll never forget my English teacher telling us all off for spitting bars outside our classroom, and then the irony of us then walking in and then learning about poetry, right? And she just told a group of black kids to not make rhymes. And these rhymes are sick, right? These rhymes are quick, these rhymes are funny, these rhymes are fast, they're funny. And I think
you heard about William Butler?
Yeah, right? So I think the earliest example of and obviously this then just continues, this constant blockage of you are not allowed in. That's what it is, right? But it starts so young that when we start getting these programs for 19 to 24-year-old black kids in these institutions like the Barbican and the Battersea Arts Centre, they're great and they're super, super important, but it starts so young in the sense that from a young age, we are not shown in our curriculum, in what's shown on TV, that poets look like anything but a slightly overweight, grey-haired white man, right? And then sometimes this white girl. So it really comes from this access, right? And then the language. So your first, sorry, I have so many thoughts about this, because at the moment, right, I'm dealing on this barrier of being asked and questioned and building for publication, whatever that means, right? And I'm on this barrier of being in these workshops that are prepping me to put something forward, right? And it's so interesting seeing what the editors are correcting me on, because there are all these things form, grammar, spelling, all these things that I was told in my bars when I was spitting did not matter. So all these rules and what we're placing importance on is I write by a different form. My form is not iambic, my form is not this sonnet, my form is how quick can we spit a bar and make sure that the punchline still hits, right? So it's by redefine, in order to get this access to QTIPOC, and I'm speaking from a specifically working class background, we gotta just reshift even the language that we're using. It pisses me off so much, sorry.
Yeah, it was. No, I wholeheartedly agree. To the point that I forgot the question. I'm just enraptured in what you're saying. But if it's in terms of publishing, I used to work in publishing also, at the Feminist Press in New York under Rizzoli, which is an Italian publishing press. And I want to speak, I don't know, I think there are a lot of issues, and I have sometimes a real impulse to just want to set it on fire, but then I also think you can have an abolitionist vision and then know that things still need to get done in the moment. You still need to be heard in those 19 to 24 and younger, especially younger, because you're super right that it starts incredibly early. How you perceive your self-worth and how that's reflected from society. They need to sort of know that they have a voice and have their voice heard and circulated and have that matter. So I don't really know. I think Travis's answers should definitely stand on this one, especially because you're broiled right in the centre of it at these intersections at the moment. But I do want to impress how fundamentally important and relevant the question of access is. It's not just these people want to get their poems heard. It's not, absolutely, it's not that. It's when, my 3-year-old nephew who has some sort of creative spark, and you and then I see the fear that grips my sister and grips me also when now he's getting into the age of going into school. Now he's going to be out in the world now, so he can't be a carefree, he can't just be in tutus and crayons, which is literally all he's ever every time you see him, crayon in one hand, tutu just somewhere near his person or on one of his toys, and I think that fear is something that access would sort of assuage, and I don't really have an answer except playing the identity game, putting QTIPOC folks in charge, putting us in charge of telling our own stories, and that's something that every group really says, and I think that that's true. I don't know.
I have so much to say around this, but I want to it's that fear, right? And I wonder if when a white man from a kind of well-off background decides that they want to be an artist, if there's any fear, right? Or there maybe is because of how we view art, but not that same comparison to me coming out to my mum as wanting to be a creative was way harder than coming out as queer or any of the other things that I've had to tell my mum, right? Saying to my
mum, you could be trans but a lawyer still.
Yeah, right, exactly. I can be trans but still getting money, right? And the fact that I was getting good grades and I said no, I want to create. My mum was like, we're poor. What are you doing, right? So, and I think this is the problem. Not only is we know the wider in a general sense arts is in a problem, right? But the so much of that is who can take the risk to go to art school? I'm still at King's College London having an awful bloody time with my degree because I got those grades, I still needed to go to an academic institution, right? I could never apply to drama school. And it's because and that's not my mum's fault, right? My mum is doing good parenting and being the best, and that's the institution and access telling us that we're not allowed in, but also that if you get there, you're never really going to get to this because we can't see any publications or anything saying that you're credited, right? So places need to start just literally I see so many of these poetry journals and they put one person of colour on their whole list of publishing that whole year or whatever, and normally they're they're not normally black and they're normally South Asian, and the topic they're normally talking about is very directly and obviously related to their identity, that South. It's this thing we've heard before, right? They're never talking about queerness, they're never talking about anything else, right? And I just think that it needs to be shaped up. And sorry, I'm not even giving article answers.
I think that's super valid, and again, you're just right. There's nothing else to really say on top of this, except to further note that, and not obvious. Intersectionality is a thing, and it's important, and I think it's part of what we're talking about here, because you're speaking from working class backgrounds, and I also think there was decades ago, and I can only I mean, I know this like factually, but I sort of note that it was spoken about when two white people recently died, Alan Rickman and David Bowie, like white national treasures, global white treasures, beauties. Great, but when they were saying, you know, people noted that they went to working class schools, were working from working class backgrounds, and they were able to go to art school, and I think that just wasn't really like a shock. There was more access then. There still was not access for like gender non-conforming people of color. I mean, it's still been terrible. Not allowed to curse on this, but I think the access, like the disparity has been like even greater. So people can like lament and say, oh, you know, working class people are still having a hard time of it in general. But I think you're so right, the point that you're making out in terms of like the domestics, in terms of family life. Like, sure, in a class sense, the disparity, I mean, class warfare is real and it's sort of rampaging throughout Britain, even more than it's ever been before, I think. But I think or I wonder, how do you also grapple with that family tip? Because I, like the respectability politics in my family have always been incredibly strong. But I even, like I'm cringing at the moment even talking about it that way, because I wonder if it's respectability politics and my family literally came from zero things. Like they came from like sharecropping Caribbean and Central America type lifestyle, and then, you know, got on that boat and we're like, we're gonna like our people are gonna be okay, like our family's gonna be okay, we're gonna wear this bow tie and wear this hat, and we're gonna go to church on Sundays, and we're gonna do these things, and we're gonna like try to get our children into good schools so they can have a profession, so they can have a family. So you know, like it's survival, and then it gets warped and there's a respectability element to it. But I think, and this is, you know, I'm just sort of riffing and thinking out loud, but I'm also thinking, Travis, about what you were saying, not just then, but also in terms of like community, either greater community or like where it starts. And I think also on a pro-black tip, like if we go back to our communities, or we stay within our communities and work within our families, and are like, you know, it's okay to want to be creative and have all these other kinds of expressions, because black people have been doing nothing but being creative. Like our existence is literally the most creative thing I can think of. Like it's the most miraculous thing, it's the most creative thing, it's the most aesthetically original thing that I've literally, I can even imagine. And I think if we exercise in some ways, as impossible as it sounds, outside of the system, like radical black love and pro-blackness at its core and throughout, like sustain that shit, I think from like that big lens to a small lens, it'll be really easy for like new QTIPOC up and coming child to say, Mom, I'm gonna be a dancer, like I'm gonna be a performer, and that's what's up. And that person to go, well, we're black, that's what we do, like this is how we express ourselves, this is our history, so if you go ahead and be your dancer, you be the best dancer. And also simultaneously work towards a collective dismantling of a system that's like, not only can you not be a dancer, but if you're going to be a dancer, you're going to starve and your family can't thrive. So.
Yeah, just coming back to one point you made, Travis, about you wonder if the white middle class guy fears going to art school. I think what they feel is excitement and confuse it for fear, because I don't think, you know, if you're talking about financial situations, I don't think people who have never actually had to worry properly about where money's coming from, of course you can never understand where that's. I mean, I did a ridiculous thing where I've got really supportive parents, so I come from quite proper working class white family in South London, but I went off and qualified as a carpenter before I went to art school, because I wanted to have a trade so people wouldn't worry about me. So I just got my trade under my belt, and then I was free to go off and do what I wanted, and no one worried, because I could just, once the art stuff went fell through the floor, I could go back to a proper job.
Look
at me now. Look at me now.
This is what this bougie degree is for, right? Like, it's the fact that like it gives. I mean, like I picked the wrong subject to get credibility, but like I'm doing like a bougie, like at a bougie place, right? Because that means when I then plan to like try and like live and sustain as like a community person and working as an artist, I can go back to my family and be like, but if worse comes to worse, I went to King's College London. It has a really huge imperial colonial history, and look at its big pillars, so it's impressive. Like
so many columns.
Yeah, so many columns, which means it must be impressive, right? So it's like, you know, it's a different way. Obviously, like the trade is that same thing, right? Like a lot of people in my family are all like working in trade, and like that is how you sustain and survive, right? So like, yeah, I totally feel you. Like, gotta do something at first to keep. Yeah.
My next question. This might be more for Travis to answer, but similar question to publishing, but more aimed at spoken word events. And are there any consistent mistakes that people are making in terms of safe spaces for trans folk? This is and go.
Yeah, I think we could probably both.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, of course. Common mistakes include, I mean, I'm performing a lot in the moment, so I could probably turn this into a poem. In fact, I'm going to listen to this back and remind me to do a poem for this. Like, like common mistakes include me being the only person of colour on a really, 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 really big lineup. Common mistakes include misgendering right before you go on stage, right? So like misgendering, I think, is like something that's going to naturally happen to me a lot of times in my life. However, like if you are hosting me, and you've read my bio, just ask. Just freaking ask.
Or read the lines.
Like, right?
Lines.
Like, yeah.
It says it on there.
It says it on there.
Travis Alabanza, they do this.
Yeah.
Right? Pronouns.
Right? So, like, to have to, like, common mistakes is misgendering, right? And it sounds like this thing that, like, I think because we hear about misgendering so often, we don't actually often talk about the real effects that it can have. And that's, like, a different effect. Like, depending on when I'm misgendered, depends on how much of an effect. And, like, I hate reducing all my, like, fight for trans liberation to, like, someone getting my pronouns right. Mm-hmm. But right before you go on stage, like, geez, like, you know, like, especially my performance element to it, if, like, as soon as I start, a lot of these times now I'm, like, doing my full show, and as soon as I get on stage, I'm starting. If I have to, like, start with, like, correcting some of my pronouns, like, I'm like, what? But also it's other ways of, like, inviting me to places that, like, could you imagine a person like me in a dress there being safe? If not, reconsider whether or not you want to warn me before you book. So I've been, like, performing a lot at, like, I mean, I'm not doing my research, but also I take that they've read my work and heard my work, and a lot of the times they haven't, right? This is a key mistake these organisers have, is that they have, like, seen black queer performance artists, booked me, and, like, not done any research on, like, who I am and my work, and are just booking me because it's LGBT History Month and they want to look good, right? So I think that's where it all boils down to. In fact, and all those other points can go straight back to this last point of, like, token. Like, I'm using the word in the sense that, like, do you love and care for the person that you're booking? Do you, like, love their work? Do you appreciate them as an artist and what they're bringing to you? If so, you'd make sure that X, Y, and Z didn't happen. If you don't, then you don't care. You're giving them money and you think you're doing a really great job. Pat on the back, look who we've got.
Well. No, I mean, I think that that's the same. I also want to... I mean, I know it's not necessarily for this podcast, whatever that really means, but I've genuinely had questions, concerns, thoughts about, representation, that's why we're here, but also, or specifically regarding, like, along the binary, and the pretense of there not being a binary, but then reinforcing one of, like, femme or masc sort of identities, like how, because that's interesting to me, and also I have to think a bit more through it, because in some ways I bet it's obvious, but when I'm asked to speak places, in some ways it's like, I'm actually, I'm warned, but I know that my friends who are femme, or who are, like, trans femme, however, like, along the femme spectrum, people just, like, assume you're, sorry to put you, but, like, assume people like that, trans femme folks, people like you to, or with, like, a feminine or femme representation, self-representation, to, like, live off your fierceness or something. Yeah. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's not me, but I've literally seen it happen, where people come to me and then there's, like, the tap, like, the shoulder, and then, like, the whisper, and they're like, yeah, they're gonna be like, these kinds of gay, you know how white people are, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. This was gonna go on with me and my, like, daily bow tie situation, and then, high femme, truly fierce and, like, identifies fierce and, like, legit are fierce as fuck, but, like, as though that gives you some sort of, like, black magical negress power to, like, lift yourselves above and, like, not experience violence because you can stomp them with your, like, fishnets and your, like, combat boots. And, like, homie, like, this is not how that works. Like, first, I don't know what that means, and I don't know, and in some ways, first of all, I totally recognise and hear what you're saying about how, like, that now it's a part of your poetry, whether you wanted it to be or not, especially if you're about to perform. Like, that's cast a poll over how you are going to now be in this performance space. And then for me, I also read it, like, for myself as a form of misgendering as well, that the differences that I've seen between, like, femme and trans femme people being prepared to enter a space and how I'm addressed, because it's almost like, well, like, we get that you're a woman, and so, like, fundamentally you're going to be a bit sensitive, and so people are going to see you in the bow tie, and, like, we just want to prepare you, because, like, transgressing masculinity, even though it's better to be transgressing towards masculinity than the other way, as we know, we just want to let you know, because we're looking out for you. And that's the only way that I can think to read it, really, in these moments. Like, so she or they can live off of her or their fierceness, but, like, all I have to, like, collapse on when I'm seen or like seen by them, even if it's not the accurate way, especially not, is as woman, which is weak, therefore I need some sort of, like, additional. And I'm like, but what is going on here? And I think like, I'm giving a lot of words to this experience and trying to tease it out, but I want to be clear that this happens in, like, the space of 10 or 15 seconds. Like, it's super quick, but that is, like, obvious. That's the scene, and that's the set, that's how it's, that those are the positionalities that are, like, then made to exist. And am I going to spend my time writing myself out to them and trying to correct and find the nuance and spend an hour and a half on this, or am I going to, like, shove myself on stage for my 5 minutes? And it has to be the latter, right? Because we're also living in, like, a capitalist sense and understanding of community, and there's no time, which is what, like, hyper-capitalism does. Like, it robs us of the time to, like, slow down and say, not that you're misgendering me, not something like you're trying to say, like, as reductive as that, but really, here are the conditions which you are robbing me of to thrive in my own purpose. And here's why that's not okay. So I guess I had some things to say about it also. But
when we spoke last time with Travis, it did seem also like a lot of people that were putting on spoken word, not a lot, but some, and especially the ones that went wrong, said, oh, we've done enough to be welcoming because we've put a plus sign on the end of LGBT. And that massing together of quite a large disparate group of people into one symbol seems to be causing some a lot of problems as well.
So I call BS on it all, right? Like, I think that, like, after these events, people are like, oh, but, like, it's so hard to bring together this community, it's so hard to do this and this. Yeah, it is hard to bring together a group of people with various things, and, like, but, like, also, like, not gonna blow my own trumpet because I didn't even do most of the, like, hard work and grafting organising in this, right? So, like, I was like, queer creations, right? This was not a perfect night. Like, no night is perfect. There was some white woman that spoke for, like, 10 minutes for too long, right? And we all knew that, and that was a mistake on our part.
Just the
sonnets. Like, right? And we know that there was, like, a poem there that, like, shouldn't have been in there, right?
All of them.
Yeah, right. But the night itself was not QTIPOC specific. It was open if people wanted to turn up. No one was policing, like, no one was asking if there were what sexuality at the door. I know there were straight people in there, right? Which, like, at the end I was like, okay. But, like, at the time I, like, you know, and this night was a really nice vibe. It created, like, a really nice energy for certain people. I hope. I don't know what some people think, right? And there wasn't these, like, big hiccups. If, like, there were others, then I hope that they could come forth to the organisers, right? And then it was this idea that, like, yes, that we had to put in some work to do that, right? Like, but that's what responsibility you take on when you're creating a space. So all these organisers, like, last year, I mean, like, I don't really think they're doing it anymore. I think it was, like, a quick trend that was going on last year. Like, I'm a straight person, I want to put on a queer event, right? Because let's commodify on that. And it's still kind of happening. They have a responsibility. Like, you have to take on that responsibility that you are now hosting a space. And that is a responsibility. If you don't want the responsibility, don't do it. Right? Like, simple as, because you're hosting space to people. And I think they do enough just to invite us. But, like, you know, like, if I invited someone to my house for dinner, but then, like, gave them unseasoned chicken, then I'm not really giving them a good dinner.
Or asked them to cook, which is actually what happened.
This is, that's way more accurate, right? They ain't giving us any food.
There's the cupboard.
Come over, pay for your transport, come over, then cook, and pay for the food as well. Because so much of this is unpaid, is right? Like, I feel like I hate bringing up payment a lot of the times, but, like, real, right? Like, you know, a lot of these queer POC, trans POC artists that were getting booked for these events were, like, I hate the word established. We're all, like, but, like, as in, like, in the systems idea of established, were published, were, like, you know, by the academy, was all, like, already, like, given all this, like, credibility that if a white person had, they would never be asked to do it for free. Right? And that's what I mean. We're, like, inviting them over, but we're also not paying them, right? Like, so I don't know. Yeah.
So yeah, in short, I think, I mean, the nights just can do a lot of work. So that's a bit secret story what the poem that I chose was about, in terms of being, like, having care, like, thinking of care as a real thing. And, like, shout out also to the Care Collective, which is fantastic. But also like what Travis was saying, being responsible, and that doesn't just mean, you know, like coddling or like patronizing or like having to like care for and like hold us, but just really think about the radical potential of what it means to hold a space, and to give access, like we were just talking about. I think that's I'm sorry to be, I mean, it sounds a little bit woo or like abstract, but I really, really genuinely feel if people were just careful, like had more care in terms of what it meant to host the thing or do like perform an act, I think that will cut out a lot of the problem, because there's already systemic BS that we're talking about, right? But I think for any people who are listening and try to walk in the purpose of change and like making things, I don't even know, I'm going to say like equitable, not equality, but like really a system in which people can thrive, like everyone can thrive. I think just think before you do things. I think the ability to like live in ignorance is, if not then one of the whitest things I've ever heard. And yeah,
it's a really good quote.
yeah, I live for bumper
I
stickers.
think we're going to sort of half end there because I really like that. But I'd like to just sort of finish by talking about your writing, the both of you. And maybe we'll start with Travis.
Yeah, so like last week I showcased a piece of work I've been working on for a while. Wow, really great plug. Called Stories of a Queer Brown Muddy Kid. It's a live art kind of cross-disciplinary piece that is, I promise, isn't as wanky as I just made it sound. And it did really well at the RVT, and it looks like it's going to be at the Hackney Attic at the end of March. It tells the story of a 16-year-old, at that time, gay kid walking around gay bars underage, and it's a webcam conversation between that person, their mum, and God. Again, isn't as wanky as it sounds. But yeah, and I'm also performing at the Genderfuck Ball next week at Goldsmiths. I bought a candy floss dress for it. It should be fun. Yeah.
I really should go.
Have you got a blog?
Oh yeah, website's currently being made, but you can follow me on Twitter where I do lots of angry things and emotions at Travis Alabanza. And also my SoundCloud I've started using as a bio for my dates because I'm still waiting for that website to be made. Cool.
So how did this latest piece develop?
Yeah.
Was it workshopping or was it?
Right, so like Stories of a Queer Brown Muddy Kid is basically, I'm kind of cheating, as in the name's not new. So like when I was in Bristol, so I grew up in Bristol, and when I was deciding to leave Bristol, I spent like a year and a half on like the open mic poetry scene in Bristol, and kind of just being like, maybe, you know, really needing to improve, and that was a really great time, but also like I felt like I wasn't being really heard, and I kept on seeing like a lot of people that were like progressing in this idea of like bookings and like people talking about them, and at that time I was really young and like wanting that too. So I left with like, the Stokes Croft Art Festival happened every year, and I like emailed them and said, you need to give me a slot, I'm making my own show. And I didn't have a show. And I put out this thing called Stories of a Queer Brown Muddy Kid, which is basically just this really good name and then really not a show. So then when I decided that now, like 3 years on, like I felt like I was ready to create something, I didn't want to change the name because the age I was writing it at was very relevant to like what I was doing now. And what I did is I like started talking to a lot of my queer black, they don't identify as queer actually, that's really important. I started talking to my gay black friends from back home about like what it was like for us growing up, because I'm the only one, I was thinking a lot about the fact that I'm the only one that now IDs as queer, I'm the only one that like IDs as non-binary, and I was thinking about, I'm also the only one that has left Bristol and left that place and gone to London and whatever this means in King's College London, and a university aspect and all the privileges I've accessed through that. So we just started talking about all the times we like snuck into gay bars, and I took like actual conversations they've had with like their parents, and religion like was this common theme between all of us, and just created like this freeway conversation. So it wasn't really workshops, it was more like taking like phrases and like turning them into like pieces of work. Like each piece in the, like, it's like a poetry show, but it's not really, like it kind of runs through as a theatre piece, and each section is very clearly like talking about one phrase, and it's kind of taking that phrase and like seeing where we go from it. And it was really healing. It was just like do you know what it was? It was like a complete like self-indulgent healing piece of work, because I hadn't really like sorted out that stuff, that being young and at that time like the type of masculine that like really works for light-skinned black people that look like me. I hadn't really processed what that meant to be in underage, like be underage in those gay bars, right? Like that's violent, so I needed to like sort that shit out. So yeah, if that sounded interesting to anyone, come along.
And say, what have you got going on at the moment you'd like to talk about?
Gosh, sure, I'm watching a lot of Scandal.
Yes.
I don't know, did you say... So we have Travis and I think a couple of other people are going to be on a panel next Wednesday at University of the Arts London called Beyond Gender, The Identity of Fashion. That's Wednesday the 17th from 12 to 2. This week on BBC 4, so there's that. I'm also on Twitter, but I'm so terrible at Twitter. I'm really trying to be better at social media, especially because I like bother Travis for most of my days. But Smythe, SaySmythe on Twitter. Same for my WordPress, and I'm also in the process of building a website. In terms of writing, trying to get on that academic grind, but then also I am currently working on a chapbook of non-anglophone I don't even know what to call them, stories, memories, partly about about blackness. Let's just go there. They're about my they started from a place of really trying to reconcile with my relationship to my father and his absence, but then also our meditations of like masculinity, and also because Costa Rica and also spoke Costa Rican Spanish, and also Garifuna, which is a dialect, indigenous language from Central America, spoken throughout Central America, to really think about the language we use to afford us a space of safety, and what happens when that's not present, and how to really speak one's truth when you're speaking in a language of the colonizer. So it's about that. As yet untitled. Yeah.
And what is your editing process when you're writing poetry? Do you share your work with people, or do you...
I drink a lot.
Yeah.
I hide it away. I cry. It's off the record, right? And then eventually I have a really close group of friends with whom I write that sort of wrest it from my hands. Like they force it from me. They're like, you need to share. We need to see this. Share yourself. And then I do. And then there's more crying. Yeah, I think that's really the extent of the process. I like to write things by hand. I always have a book with me, and I really like to do that. And then I also, so much as I'm thinking, I think a lot of what I think about and write about is so bound up in nostalgia, because when I want to think about big things like colonialism and oppression and masculinity and misogyny and these sorts of things, diaspora, I don't really need to go terribly far. I just need to go to my mum's house, like it's really, really bound and entrenched in there, how I begun to think about those things forcefully and then had to reconcile them. And so sometimes I just, it's literally like a exercise in masochism. I just yesterday came back from a few weeks, I want to call it holiday, but that would be super generous. Oh my god!
I only caught up with it yesterday.
Definitely tweeted about that.
I was like, wow.
It was like, it was amazing because I felt, that's a whole other thing, but I definitely went, and speaking about creative process, I definitely went into that with the idea of like, I'm gonna write the shit out of this, like this material, and in a sense that protected me, my creative process actually went back and protected me as opposed to eventually exposing me, because I was able to see it through the lens of a creator and someone who was gonna let themselves be like radically open to whatever experiences and sometimes violences that would occur in that space, traveling with my mum throughout various countries, of like the external otherness but also the foreignness of just being two people and being adults together, which has never really happened. And so I think I want to say I'm in the process of writing that, but I think I've been decades in the process of writing something like this, like, because also that's real. and sorry to ramble and make this another aside, but I think, and we were speaking about this just a little bit earlier, in terms of like QTIPOC youth and how they can grow up and think about having access or having not just a purpose, of course they all have a purpose, but like being able to share that purpose. And I think a lot of what that's tied to, especially in terms of access, is the fact that we're not expected to live that long. We're not really expected to sort of live and thrive and be contributors to our communities and tellers of our own stories. And I think, it's just sort of like moving myself like a narcissist, but like I think really what I'd like to reconcile with, and what I think I'd like to write about next, is some sort of reconciliation or grappling with how, like, what a QTIPOC adult, like, even what does adulthood mean, instead of thinking about but while in the wake of thinking through the fact that so many of our lives are cut short and people aren't even saying our names, but to really think about, like, every day I live beyond the medium of the age of when, like, trans people of colour don't have a life expectancy, which is 27 in the US. I actually don't know what it is in the UK. I don't
think they have that data.
Pardon?
I don't even think they've
got that. That's what I was, but I didn't want to, But like every hour I live beyond that number, I think, well, what am I doing? Like, I feel like, not that it's on borrowed time, because that's speaking like out of my ass about like from a space of sheer privilege, but I really think, like, part of it too is like, how Hollywood, so there's like a trans boom in Hollywood, but it's like super tragic stories of these white women who are played by men, cis men, and they're all incredibly tragic, but what does it really look like for there to be some tragedy, but also to really be able to tell a story and grapple with what does it mean to, like, once have had a mother-daughter relationship and now to have this new found, like, adult relationship that is so dysfunctional, but also speaks to the intersections of a lot of violences, and to be able to like have the space to think through that beyond the age when I should not even be here. That was a long explanation, but that's what I'm
as
having.
a final point, because we're talking about younger listeners and younger writers, is there any particular advice you wish you'd been given?
Fuck the canon. Sorry.
Like profanity thing.
Yeah, like you invite us. Just don't, like, I wish I told my younger self, like, don't listen to what they say is like poetry, like, find what you think is great, read it, love it, and then, like, just keep on practicing, and, like, just, I don't know, like, I feel like black poor writers have this extra inner voice that, like, I'm sure a lot of writers have in their head, telling them not only, like, that what they're writing isn't good, but, like, that they can't even write, and that voice I still sometimes question if I can write yet, like, and I think, like, I would just say, like, find other writers that, like, speak like you, start looking at poetry in, like, a broader sense of, like, words, and then start realizing that, like, the music artists you see, like, creating shit, the people you see on, like, your, like, corner, like, when you're cussing out your brother, like, these are, like, rhymes that you can then take and create into, like, poetry. But yeah, really just keep on, like, tell my younger self to keep on doing it.
I don't know, I think, so if we're saying what we tell our younger selves and then what we tell, like, QTIPOC youth, I think I would say to myself that I really like the shape of your lips, and I think that when you part them, worlds come forth, and I think that you should, if no one else will, really honour that you can do that, because it's really amazing. So yeah, that's what I'll tell adorable little essay with the same size glasses, oddly. Yeah, I don't know, I think that's sort of all. I think everyone's so important, and just like put yourself there.
Take up so much space.
Love the shape of your lips, that's what I would say.
Very nice. Actually, one final thing before we wrap up. Is there anyone that you would recommend writers and performers for listeners to check out?
A person called Travis Alabanza. Really awkward.
I'm also wondering if, instead of, like, recommending them to, like, specific people, recommending them to online spaces that will provide them with, like, even more. So, like, I personally, like, loved, like, I don't know how to put, the Pantler journal.
The Pantler,
Yeah, like, that was like a really good resource for me to find other young creatives and doing stuff. I think Galdem coming out at the moment, a lot of the people, they're like doing a lot of lists of young creatives, and these are people that like, you know, when you say your name, someone will go, oh, I have, like, they won't be like, I've heard of them, and I think that's so important, right? Because they're normally saying something that's so important. So, like, also check out, Dutty Girl, Bristol DJs, like, they're like an art space, and they like make their own fashion and stuff, but they're also like doing DJ stuff, and I think it's really cool for me to look at like when they DJ, like how poetic what they're speaking over it is. Start like basically redefining this narrow box of poetry for me, like, because I wouldn't have got into poetry without music. So start listening to music, start listening to grime artists, like, yeah. But I love grime, so that's always going to be my recommendation. So
start listening to grime. It's fantastic. What's the second? Yeah, I want to second, which I've been doing all day, everything Travis says, cosign always, all the way through. I think the panda's really, really fantastic. I kind of been moved by, like, we were just slagging off on anthologies a bit earlier, and I think that volume, it's not an anthology, but like that's like a way to do it. I mean, it's like seems really radical and really collective, and really an example of like how we can be a community and how our texts can sort of coexist without having to co-opt or speak for one another. Even the editor's note. I obviously have to give a plug for themlit.com. And also there is some really, really dear friends have a zine called Mixed Up. It's a mixed race, queer, feminist zine. The second volume is just now wrapping up, so I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, and I'm fingers crossed that I'm staying in it. And I think that and zines in general are really a fantastic space. I mean, there's like Rudy Lowe and Jacob Joyce and lots of other people, right? And I think that's something that's been going on for decades. Like, there's an entire system of like circulation that if we could just, and I hate to like put money on it because some of us just don't have any, but like if we just give that more attention and give that more play, then it also will continue to shake the systems and the hierarchies of like publishing and giving agency to who are the gatekeepers of our voices. So yeah.
I just wanted to reiterate that I've really enjoyed that anthology that I mentioned earlier as well, Travelling the Line, because not least because each writer was allowed 1 or 2 pages of space for an artist statement rather than the short bio that everyone gets, and there's a real insight as to why that person was writing in general, no matter what the context was. And if it's, I was going to say if it's in your library, it's not going to be like the Poetry Library have it in London and the South Bank, have a couple of copies, so it does exist in certain places. But thank you, Travis. Thank you, SA. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And as many of these links as we've just been talking about, I'll put in the description box for the YouTube video.
Fab.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Glad to be here with you, Travis.
Peace out.